Hi, and welcome back to Body Talk with Rachel, where I, along with the help of special guests, talk about body concerns among different groups. I'm Rachel. I'm a doctoral intern at the Counseling Center, and I use she, her pronouns. And I'm excited to be joined today by Dorian Holliday from the Center for Student Diversity. And we're going to have a conversation on body ideals and concerns among gay and bisexual men, which I'm excited to have. Thank you so much for joining, Dorian. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you for having me, Rachel. I really appreciate being a part of this series. It's a topic that I'm very interested in and I'm very much affected by it. My name is Dorian Holliday. I am a counseling psych grad student, and I'm also a GA with the Center for Student Diversity, particularly with LGBTQ student development and diversity.
Great, awesome. So I just want to note, which I've been doing in all of the videos so far, is we're going to talk about body image concerns among gay and bisexual men generally, and maybe from specific aspects of that experience, but knowing that we're not able to address all of the perspectives and experiences that gay and bisexual men have. So as viewers, just please note that unfortunately we can't speak to all perspectives, but we hope to highlight some important themes. So to start, uh, there is perhaps a stereotype that gay and bisexual men, place a lot of emphasis on their physical appearance and their body shape. I was hoping if you could speak to this stereotype. Is there truth to it? And maybe what are the messages that gay and bisexual men receive about how they should look?
Yeah, definitely. So there is definitely a stereotype that gay and bisexual men are very body conscious. And so the prevalent body type within our community is definitely someone with muscles, someone who has six-pack abs, who has very well-defined musculature on every part of their body. And so that has been the defining, I would say, the main body type that's been going on since, I would say, probably in the aftermath of the AIDS epidemic, for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, you're hitting on what I was thinking. Like, where did this stereotype come from?
Mhm.
And you're indicating the AIDS epidemic maybe being the start.
Yeah, if we're looking at sort of like modern history, it's funny because
Mhm.
I actually did a research proposal about this very topic, and the thing is, like, there have been the muscular body type has definitely been in even before the AIDS epidemic. Like, gay men had pinup magazines, and men went to the gym, and so that body type was there, but it didn't become sort of like um, prevalent until after the AIDS epidemic because of the um, physical side effects of the AIDS virus. People didn't want to be seen as sick. If you were skinny, people assumed if you are gay and you're skinny, you must have AIDS. And so a lot of men tried to dealt with that by going to the gym and pumping iron and becoming really buff so that people didn't assume that they were sick. And
Mhm.
so, and of course, like that continued on, like even into the 90s and the 2000s. And of course, like with the proliferation of social media, where everything is very visual, that body type has reigned supreme.
Mhm. Wow, I was just like imagining the stigma associated during the AIDS epidemic that
Yeah.
still exists today, and that being skinny, being associated with that, really reinforces the desire to not want to be skinny.
Yeah, it's very interesting how we as, or even if you're just talking about Americans, like we assume if someone is very thin, it must be because they're sick,
Mm.
And so, and of course, like you internalize that and you don't want to be
Mhm.
seen as diseased, especially when we're talking about the AIDS epidemic, like gay men were seen as these lepers and these people who are contracting this disease and you better watch out for them. And
Mhm.
so a lot of gay men saw that as, oh, I don't want to be seen that way, so I better find a way to change that. And so the gym just ended up being like the place to go,
Mhm.
um, and you know, of course, to work out. And the thing is, like the gym, in and of itself, was a social place for gay men to socialize and to find workout partners, to find friends, to find their own social groups, and to find romantic or sexual partners. So the gym has always had a place like for our community, and
Mhm.
but there's various reasons why people go to the gym. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but there's social aspects to it as
Mhm.
well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing that this general like message of not being thin, like being more muscular is associated with being healthier and not having AIDS. I'm
Mhm.
just thinking about what those messages are now. It sounds like muscularity has maintained, but also where are those messages primarily coming from today?
Those are primarily coming from social media.
Mhm.
Instagram for sure, because it's very visual heavy, but also Twitter, Facebook, dating apps for sure. A lot of headless torsos on profiles, just like no name and just a headless torso with abs and you know a pumped up chest and
Wow.
um, but also with our media. When I think of like gay magazines and you know, there's always like sometimes the person on the person on the front cover of a magazine isn't even gay. It's just a guy who has you know a well-defined body, and
Wow.
so we're given. So when you see all of those images, like whether it's on social media, whether it's on dating apps, or even in our own media, that's being presented to us as like we're a
Mhm.
reflection of your community. When all you see is one body type, you're given the message that, oh well, this is what's attractive, this is what this is what is attractive, this is what is beautiful, this is what is healthy,
Mhm.
uh, and this is what sells. And because of that, a lot of gay men internalize that and become very self-critical, as if we aren't already self-critical as it is because of homophobia. We also have this like
Right.
added stress of having to measure up even within our own community.
Mm. Wow, that's a great deal of pressure
Mm,
to measure up.
yeah.
And yeah, yeah,
And
and just yeah,
yeah,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry to cut you off. But yeah, I think like I mean the biggest like stressor is of course like homophobia and how we are seen by the by the straight community as gay men are seen as less are not seen as men, are not seen as real men. And of course, like in American culture, musculature equals masculinity. Like you are
Mm,
a real man if you have muscles. So we're trying to like catch up. We're trying to do the same thing that straight men are doing, which is, you know, looking a certain way so we can be seen as real men. And it's even more apparent because like our masculinity is always in question.
mm,
It's always in question. Because
yeah.
you're gay, you must be a certain way. And that's not, you know, of course, like there's nothing wrong with being effeminate, but we
Mhm,
internalize that and think, okay, well, I don't want to be that way. I want to be seen as a real man. And being a real
mm,
man equals having muscles.
mm. Yeah, I just am thinking about that like muscularity means so much in that
Mhm.
way that it communicates health and well-being, but also is this message of masculinity. And like
Mhm.
why those are so tied together is something I'm sitting with thinking. Like why is muscularity and masculinity tied? And I I think from a lot of things you've already mentioned of health, but also this view of probably men historically and being like Greek god like figures, and we've
Yeah,
like developed this like muscularity is a man thing.
hmm,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah. So I'm thinking that exercise is something that that helps gay and bisexual men achieve this muscularity, and exercise can be potentially harmful if you over engage in it, if you're engaging in it past like your ability, or if it's taking up too much focus in your life. I was hoping if you could speak to that, but also are there other potentially harmful behaviors that gay and bisexual men might be engaging in that could be potentially harmful, but also related to this ideal?
Yeah, most definitely. And it's funny enough, like I am a perpetuator. I perpetuate you know, the stereotypes, but I also want to fight back against it. But I always like look at like people who I'm following and they'll talk about how like, oh my God, I haven't been in the gym today. Like something's wrong. You know, this sort of like anxiety of like, I have to be at the gym. I have to, or like I'm gonna lose muscle mass if I don't go to the gym. And you definitely, it's very much, I mean, it was very much that way before the pandemic, but it's very much prevalent now, especially with limited access to the gym. A lot of people who have used the gym as sort of like their main social, um, their main social like outlet, when, during that, and it's still going on, like the gym's being closed or like there's limited like hours or like limited amount of people who can go. A lot of people are struggling with that, oh God, if I don't go to the gym, I'm going to lose my body. So what does that mean if I lose my body? You know, that's something that's very much apparent in our community. I will say, sort in terms of like the things, so like what I see in terms of like our community is excessive exercising, and there's also steroid use as well. That's very prevalent in the community because it's seen as sort of like a faster way to gain muscle. But of course, like we both know, like there are major health problems that can happen with steroid use. And there's also a lot of excessive monitoring of weight and size and just very like hyper vigilant in terms of, oh, my calves are not this way, or I don't, I have, body fat, I'm looking at the percentages of body fat that you have, and I'm, I'm 215 pounds like today, or I'm trying to get up to like 220. There's sort of like this very like vigilant, sorry, I can't say the word, diligent uh use of like trying to really like looking at everything about your body, whether it's like the calories or fat, carbs, protein, like everything about what you're putting into your body. And there's never a sort of like a pleasurable view of food. Food is sort of seen as like a means to an end. Like this, I'm eating this because it's going to give me the body that I want. It's never like, oh my God, like this food is so good. It tastes good. It's never that. It's this food. I'm going to eat this chicken breast, these greens, this rice, like every day, because that is what you need to do in order to get the body that I
Mm.
have. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Just thinking about the relationship with food and how
Mhm.
there's like a loss in that way of being able to maybe more leisurely enjoy food
Yeah.
and choose it spontaneously.
Yeah, you'll see it all the time, like even especially around the holidays, like
Mm.
people beating themselves because they had literally just one day of not excessively like monitoring the food that they ate. And it always happens like the day after Thanksgiving or Christmas, and people like will post, lamenting like how much they ate the day before. And it's like, you still have 8-pack abs. Like, what are you complaining about? Like,
Mm.
or they'll say like, I'm getting fat, or
Mm.
like I have a dad bod. And it's like,
Mm.
no, no, you don't. Or the way like people will throw, the way men will throw, it pisses me off because especially as a counseling major,
Mhm.
how many times like people will just throw the word body dysmorphia around. Oh, my body dysmorphia is flaring up.
Mm.
Like, oh, that's a pretty like harsh like word to use. Like if you're going, especially as counselors or like me as a student, like that's not something you throw around. That's not a
Right.
word that you throw. That's an actual disorder,
Mhm.
with criteria. And so if
Right.
you feel like that's the way, then yes, we can have a conversation about that. But to just throw that around because you ate a burger today, or because you don't like, the fact that your thighs are not as big as you want them to be, or because your biceps are not as big as you want them to be, that's not the same,
Yeah,
you
it's
know?
almost like minimizing the
Yeah,
experience of other people who are maybe struggling with
yeah.
body dysmorphia. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, like there is, of course, like I can understand where that comes from because like
Mhm.
if you're so hypercritical about your body, then of course you're probably going to think, oh, I may use that term body dysmorphia,
Mhm.
but body dysmorphia is very much a very specific thing. And you not being satisfied with the fact that you haven't reached your goal weight, that's not body dysmorphia. That's, there's more to body dysmorphia than that. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like there's like a lot of maybe guilt too around like enjoying those holidays and then posting afterwards of
Mhm.
like I ate so much, or I like need to do X, Y, and Z following this. That
Mhm.
there's some guilt in that experience. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of like internalized shame in terms of like
Mhm.
having a lack of discipline or the lack of control.
Mm.
Like I need to go to the gym like 5 times or 6 times a day. Like people like will really pride themselves on being disciplined enough to go to the gym. Like even like 'cause I will see like when people are like, oh, I didn't feel like going to the gym, like but I got up and I went to the gym, like even when I didn't want to. And there is that sort of, we praise people for doing that because it means, oh, they're not lazy.
Mhm.
They're working towards their goal and they're doing it even when they don't want to. And it's supposed to be seen as inspirational, but sometimes like it is okay to take a day off. You know,
Right.
there's also the fear of like you're doing this a lot. There's always the risk of injury.
Mm.
So maybe it is good to like sort of like just take a day where you don't go to the gym. Not the
Mhm.
world will not, will not crumble. Your body will not dissolve into like, dust because you didn't go to the gym that one day out of the week.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. Like there's definitely benefits to having goals and working towards goals, but also considering the health aspect of it and balance in one's life that you don't have to go to the gym every day.
Yeah. And it's interesting you say the goals. It's like that's also a
Mhm.
big thing is about what are your goals
Mm.
for the body that you want or the body that you have. And
Mhm.
I'm sure like we'll probably mention this, but there are social benefits to having a certain body type,
Mm.
especially in the gay and bisexual community.
Yeah, I was just thinking like, and are those goals achievable
Right.
too? Yeah, yeah. Do you want to speak to those now
Yeah.
yeah.
So there is definitely privilege to having a certain body type.
Mhm.
I say this as I'm a model. I model for universities and drawing groups, and I see like there are certain guys that get more work because they have a certain body type. Because that is going to bring in more artists. That's going to bring in more people who are going to want to draw or paint them because they have a certain body type. And of course, and that's no shade to those models, like get the work. I'm trying to do the same thing too,
Mhm.
but it is very apparent that only a certain body type will get more work, or they'll get an email back after inquiring about model work. I see certain models who are booked a lot and who are and so it's very interesting when I hear back from like drawing groups who are like, oh, we're booked like the next couple months. And I'm like, well, yeah, you're booked because you keep hiring the same dude. Like literally, like this man has been working like twice this month. Like, let's get some different people here. And so there is benefits to having that body. And there's also, even if you're not a model, just other, just sponsorships. There are a lot of Instagram accounts where
Mhm.
like if you have a certain body, you'll get those sponsors, and you'll get more likes, you'll get more followers, you will get
Mhm.
invited to parties, you get invited, especially circuit parties. You will attract certain other men. There's also the benefit of having there's also the desire for romantic and sexual partners.
Mhm.
So desirability is a big deal when it comes to gay and bisexual men. Wanting to be seen as attractive to other men is very
Mhm.
important. I think about, there was a study that I read last year that talked about, it was basically they were doing this research study where gay and bisexual men interacted with other men online on this like app, and they felt far more rejection when they were rejected by another gay or bisexual man that they thought was very attractive and of like a higher social status
Mhm.
than them, than they were when they were rejected by a straight guy. So
Oh.
you have this thing of course, like everyone wants to be attractive to like people who they are attracted to,
Mhm.
but it definitely becomes heightened when you think about desirability and when you think about social status,
Mhm.
because it can a lot of times like our community can be very much like high school. It's about, who's the prettiest and who has, who is seen as, you know, someone who's like of, like I said, like an upper like social status, who is seen as top tier. And so that can add to the stress of being gay or bisexual
Mhm.
like in the community, because you're always trying to either one up someone or trying to like get up on people's level.
Yeah, yeah, I'm just thinking about that amount of stress and pressure that's
Mhm.
there. It's like approval within the
Right.
community perhaps, but then
Approval.
there's this extra level of like attractiveness and desirability too that might even be beyond approval
Mhm.
too.
Yeah, I will it I think I've told this to a friend, like I definitely noticed a change in terms of when I started to like lose weight and gain more muscle, the amount of um the amount of messages that I got on dating apps. So, and I didn't even like post like shirtless pics or anything like that. But of course,
Mhm,
like people, guys who do post shirtless pics are, of course, are going to get multiple messages
mhm,
coming at them. But I did notice like a sizable shift in the frequency of messages that I got,
mhm,
because my body was starting to become the body that people coveted in the community.
mhm. Yeah, that's like a direct like representation of a gain that you
Right.
received, that like your body was aligning with the standards and you received direct feedback about it
Yeah.
too. Which I can see that maintaining these body ideals for everyone in the community.
Hmm.
And it is also leading me to want us to talk a little bit more about the impact of these ideals. um, I know you've mentioned, the amount of pressure that there is, and also the concerns there are for people who are maybe really striving for this ideal and engaging in exercise, maybe steroid use. But I see it as both. There's people who are maybe affected by it in the unhealthy behaviors they're engaging in, but people who are not maintaining this ideal and kind of what that impact is for them too. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think for a lot of people, there's definitely just like lamenting the fact that it can be pretty isolating. Like if
Mhm.
everyone has like the same body type and they're getting so much attention and they're being seen as the most valuable in the community, that can be very, very isolating for someone, and very damaging to someone mentally if they're not that body, if they don't have that body type.
Mhm.
Because like I said, it can very much be like high school in the community, and you sort of retreat to that state like when you were a
Mhm.
teenager. um, and so that's something that I think is very there's a loneliness and sadness
Mhm.
that can happen if you see those images and you don't quote unquote measure up to those
Mhm.
standards.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And loneliness and feeling isolated can have such an impact on other
Mhm.
mental health concerns too.
Right, and what does it say about you? You internalize that and you say,
Mhm.
oh well, I guess I'm not attractive because I don't have this body,
Mhm.
or I'm not going to get a boyfriend because they don't like the body that I have. Men don't like the body that I have, or I'm not going to be able to make friends because I don't have that body. Because again, like there are gains to having that body. You get to be among like certain social groups, and then you get to have fun and go off to like on trips and go to parties and
Mhm.
be treated very well by people at the bar, or at in certain places. So there is a gay men and bisexual sexual men are acutely aware of like the benefits to having a certain body type, and when you
Mhm.
don't, there is that stress, and you definitely, you either like let it consume you and you want to like chase after that, but then there's others who will actively go against that. And because we have different body types in our community, even though yes, we're talking about specifically muscular body types,
Mhm.
but the gay community is very much about sort of like putting you in categories. Like we have twinks, and those are men who are very thin, hairless, young. Um, and then you have bears or otters, like people who are hairy, people who are bigger body build. And so they have their own community because they felt
Mhm.
like they were being ostracized by men who are musculature, because that was the main body type in our community that was celebrated. And so but there's implications with all of these categories. You know, when people think of a twink, they think of a white boy. They don't think of someone who's Latinx, or they don't think of someone who's Black. You know, there's racial components to it. You know, or when we think of, you know, someone who's a bear, like we think of someone who is hairy. And there's implications when it comes to hair. Like there are people that don't like a hairy man unless he has muscles with it.
Mm.
You know, or you know, hair has its own connotations. You know, hair is seen as dirty to some people. It's seen as unattractive to some people.
Mm.
So, and it depends on that attractiveness based on what that body is with. You know, so it's, you know, we're constantly putting each other in, you know, in these categories, and it definitely affects like how people feel like they fit in the community. You know, what if you don't? What if you do like bears, but you don't have the body of one, like, you know, or what if you are, you know, what if you do like muscular men, but you're not, but you don't have that body type. You know, we're all trying to find like our tribe in the communities, and that, and what's being propped up as like the standard can definitely affect how people feel, um if they feel like they fit in the community.
Yeah, my like original thought was, wow, like maybe the bear stereotype seems like a little more body acceptance there,
Mm,
and that maybe it's counter to muscularity and could be healthier. But then as you described it further, it seems very clear to me it's a body ideal in and of itself, as there are, and
right.
no matter where you fall or where you want to be, there's these ideals that you're working towards, and that can be um, harmful in some ways, emotionally and physically too.
Yeah, and there's racism and
Mm-hmm.
femophobia in those communities as well, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, you know, just because, you know, one group sort of like comes together like in response to like another group doesn't mean they don't have their own problems as well, even within the
Right.
community. Like there's even more infighting and gatekeeping in terms of like who can call themselves what and what, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, we're also talking about race, but we're also talking about age as well.
Mm.
You know, how men, you know, when we think about body types, we're also talking about youth. We have an obsession with youth in our community.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, I've seen like guys in their 50s and their 60s with six-pack abs who have the bodies of like 22-year-olds. And but that feeds into this thing that we care about, which is youth and sexual attractiveness. So
Mm.
it's like when we call people daddy, you know, we're thinking about a muscular older man. We're
Mm.
not thinking about someone who like has like a pot belly. You know what I mean? And
Right.
yes, and there are some people that do,
Mm-hmm.
but but the older men who are able to get modeling jobs or to get sponsorships or, you know, to get, you know, other like privileges, they have that muscular body.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, yeah, wow. That's a really interesting point.
mhm,
And you also highlighted racism within the community, and
mhm.
ageism wasn't something I was thinking about either, but I'm glad you highlighted that too. And I was hoping you can maybe speak on racism within the gay and bisexual community, and just thinking about how that relates to body concerns within their experiences.
Yeah, definitely. So I remember using, there's probably one research study that's specifically about gay and bisexual men of color and about
Mhm.
body image issues. And they talk about, and it was actually published last year, and they talked about how uh, having to deal with like the imagery that we see in the media, which is a very Western cis heteronormative ideal of masculinity and body image. People of color, men of color, have to go up against that, and so they're um, trying to get that body because that is the standard, that is the Western standard, and so that's very, you know, that can cause a lot of stress for someone who is thin and Asian. You know, they're not seen as a real man. They're not seen as attractive in the community because they don't have that very white, you know, it's a, you know, the body ideal is very cis heteronormative and very
Mhm.
white.
Mhm.
And so we're trying to like, It's already bad, and you know, we're already stressed enough, like being a minority or a racial minority, but you're also
Right.
um, trying to get to that standard, and that can cause, you know, disordered eating, that can cause steroid use, low self-esteem, depression. You know, it was a really good article, a really good
Mm-hmm.
research study about it. But it's something that I've personally seen. I've also talked about with other friends, where you'll see like pictures of like a group of men, and there's probably like one person of color, and you know, of course, and you know, we like to deduce the fact that, you know, that person of color is there because like he has the same body type as they do, as the other white men. Like he wouldn't be able to be a part of that group if he didn't have that body type. You already have a strike against you because of your race, but you can't come in here with like any old body type, you know, any old body. Like
Mm-hmm.
you need to have the same body type as they do in order to
Mm-hmm.
be in with them. And that's something that you see a lot, like with people of color, like even here in Baltimore, like, you know, we, you know, you definitely see like groups of like white gay men, and there's like that one person of color, but he has the same body type, which is
Mm.
which is why he's in there.
Wow.
Um,
So like body type is like entry
yes,
into those groups
yeah,
for
you
people of
have to have
color.
that, yeah, or
Wow.
you will not be seen. And then that goes into sort of like desirability and whether you care about being seen as seen as desirable to white men. So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but that's it's a big deal. It is a big deal with gay and bisexual men being seen as attractive to other men.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, it's good for. I mean, of course, like everyone wants to be seen as attractive, but it definitely has currency. There's
Mm-hmm.
currency to being attractive in our community, and in order to be attractive, you have to have that body type.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I'm just reflecting on all of it and the risk that all this poses to like eating disorders or disordered eating,
Right.
and thinking one perspective of like a contributor to eating disorders is that stress and trauma contribute to the development of eating disorder symptoms, and
Hmm.
just thinking about sexual minority stress likely contributing to risk factors related,
Yeah.
but then also if you add um, racial minority stress there too, that's compounded and perhaps could increase the risk of someone for an eating disorder.
Right. You're dealing with, as men of color, you're dealing with racial stereotypes from you know, from cis het community, but also you're dealing with racial stereotypes within the gay community. You know, for instance, you know, you have Asian men who are seen as bottoms because they're thin and because they're thin. But what if you're an Asian guy who's not? But you're
Mhm.
seen as that because of that is the stereotype for Asian men. Or you think about with black men, like black men are seen as very physically dominant and athletic, and so they have to and they fulfill a certain role within the community, a sexual role in the community of being like the dominant top.
Mhm.
And that is, you know, some people lean into that because that is what, you know, because they believe like that's I'm going to get access to whatever that they want. And but then there's also like it's also very stressful because you have to come up against stereotypes about you, and you know, and that can and what does that do to your psyche, and what does that do to your relationship with your race?
Mhm.
You know?
Yeah. 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 It's like um your race, thinking about like how you identify with how you feel about your race, how you feel about your body, maybe about yourself, and sexual orientation too. Just
Yeah,
thinking about how those messages impact
yeah, and
likely in different ways, all of that. Yeah.
we attach body type to certain sexual roles. So like if you're short or if you're thin, you're the bottom. If you're very muscular or if you're very tall, you must be the top.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're dark skinned, if you're a dark skinned black man, you must be a top. You know, so we it's funny how we attribute body types to sexual roles, and we just assume that that's the case. And it's and you know, and the thing is like it's so pervasive that even I like sometimes I you know I have to check myself. You
Mm-hmm.
know, so
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're really highlighting these messages are so pervasive, and it's part of the community too. That
it's
it.
yeah, it's pervasive. And I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
It's pervasive like in the media, including gay porn.
Mm.
Like a lot of people's relationship to their sexuality and how they see themselves as gay men and how they see themselves in terms of like attractiveness, in terms of how they learn about sex, about gay sex, because of course we're not taught that, in schools, is through
Mhm.
gay porn. And
Mhm.
gay porn is a big, um, it perpetuates all of these stereotypes and all these standards that we talk about. Um, if you look at the main studios, there is a certain body type that you have to have,
Mhm.
and it is very muscular. It's very defined. And because there aren't any other outlets to see yourself, you're going to look to gay porn as your education for, okay, so how should I act? Obviously, I should be masculine because that is very much the ideal, because you see that in gay porn, whether it's like, you know, the way they're dressed or the certain roles that they take. Like there's a lot of like, traditionally masculine sort of like settings, whether it's like fraternities or, you know, cops or people positions of authority, and even the way they dress. And so masculinity and muscularity is very much prioritized in
Mhm.
the imagery of what you see. And so if you only see that in the porn that you're consuming, what does that do to you? What does that do to you in terms of your self-image,
Mhm.
uh, in terms of, and also how you see yourself within the community.
Yeah, yeah, really just perpetuating that
Mhm.
and internalizing it, but also communicating it towards others and maintaining those messages. Yeah, and I'm just thinking about, what are the barriers to changing this? Like just thinking whether that needs to be changed. I'm thinking about what keep what keeps people from continuing to adhere to these messages, and then for those that are really struggling, what are some barriers for them to seek help related to that struggle, if it's like disordered eating or body dissatisfaction or depression or anything like that.
I think there's a couple of factors. I think number one, I think we still consider eating disorders. When we think of the word eating disorder, we
Mm,
think of a teenage white girl or an adult
mm,
white woman. And
right.
so the thought of having an eating disorder just feels like a very feminine, of course that thinking is very misogynistic, like
Mhm,
it's a feminine, disorder, but obviously eating disorders affect all types of people.
mhm,
Um, there's also the lack of research on gay and bisexual men when it comes to eating disorders. Like
mm,
literally every article, like every research journal that I looked at, when it discussed the topic of eating disorders amongst gay and bisexual men, periodically talked about how there was a lack of research on
mhm,
specific population, even though it is very clear that there are many factors
mhm,
that that will lead you to believe like this is a population that definitely needs help with these particular disorders, whether it's
mhm,
anorexia, bulimia, body dysmorphia. If you look at all the stressors that gay and bisexual men have to deal with, whether it's outside of the community or inside community, this
mhm,
community is ripe for examination and support when it comes to these disorders. But because people
mhm,
think, oh, eating disorder, that's a white girl disease. Like,
mhm.
of course, people
Yeah,
are not going to be forthcoming or even feel comfortable to disclose that.
right.
And a lot of services are very much are centered around that.
Mhm,
Even like in our media, when we think about eating disorders, we never really see images of men or gay and bisexual men dealing with that disorder. So
mhm,
I can think of maybe like I watched one show on Netflix where it was about the ballet dancer, and it was in the one eating disorder. Of course, like every ballet show has like an
mhm,
eating disorder storyline. But I was actually surprised by how like they it was one of the male characters, and like
mhm,
there were sort of scenes of like him vomiting and like literally having like a notepad of like
mhm,
everything that he ate. um, and so, but that's very rare. You don't really get to see that. And sometimes
mhm,
maybe you'll see it sometimes, maybe if it's a character who's like, wrestling or trying to get more
mhm,
buff, but it's never really shown with the exact type of care or just it's not very prevalent as you
mhm.
would see with like maybe a teenage girl or a woman.
Right. Right. I definitely watched what you watched, so I'm definitely thinking about that one
Tiny
example. Yep.
Yeah, okay. I know because it's a bad show, but I watched that show literally in 2 days.
Me too. Me too.
It was so bad. My
It,
God, it was so bad. But I was actually like genuinely surprised. Like, oh, okay.
mhm,
Like I know, of course, I watch a lot about ballet shows, and of course,
mhm,
there is going to be an eating disorder storyline. But I was actually shocked that the main one was a guy.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. It's like interesting that it's almost makes sense, or it's easier for us to digest a guy who does ballet to have an
Mhm.
eating disorder, and but that is um, opening the doors to, normalizing that it's not just a woman's concern, eating
Mhm.
disorders, but you really highlighted the barriers that are in place. I
Yeah.
mean, first and foremost, eating disorders are, aligned with being a woman's issue typically, and likely a white woman's issue
Mhm.
mostly, and teenage girls. So I am even thinking about for someone who is not a white woman, would they even consider the concerns they're experiencing to be related to eating disorders? And then how can they seek help if they're not even really recognizing that as their concern?
Right. And I think as mental health professionals, we have to understand that someone's concern about their body is very different from someone else's. So, like
Hmm.
for gay men, the concern is being bigger. The concern isn't being smaller. Obviously, there are certain body parts that they want to be small, like a smaller waist.
Hmm.
But for gay and bisexual men, the goal is to be bigger, is to be more
Hmm.
muscular.
Hmm.
The goal isn't to be skinnier.
Right.
So I think it's important for mental health professionals to understand that each population has different goals or different standards, and
Hmm.
that doesn't mean that does and because of that, that means that their eating disorders are going to manifest very differently.
Right.
So like,
Right.
a gay or bisexual man is probably going to work out even more or probably lift more weights than a woman. She's probably going to do more, I guess, cardio,
Hmm.
but a gay or bisexual man who wants to be bigger is probably going to lift more weights, is probably going to eat more because they're trying to like bulk.
Hmm.
So that's very different.
Yeah, wow, that's such a fantastic point that like not only are there like not views that men might have disordered eating behaviors, but also our measuring stick of disordered
Yeah.
eating behaviors is really different. Is largely focused on women's experiences and wanting to be thin, rather than this more individualized approach to concerns about one's body and their eating behaviors.
Mhm.
Yeah. So to end our conversation, I like to ask everyone, if well, excuse me, if you're
You're
speaking
good.
to people now who might be watching this video who might be struggling with concerns about their body, and might be striving for body acceptance, do you have any strategy you might recommend to them to help them improve their body acceptance or start on that journey?
I think there's several things. Like
Mhm.
I was actually part of a workout program 3 months ago, um, and our trainer, a fellow Black gay man, his name was Aaron, and he was very. The thing that I took from him was that he practiced self compassion.
Mm.
He was very compassionate, even with his own body. Like there were times, like even now, like he talks about like, oh, he'll talk about like, oh, I'm like gain some weight or I'm not the body that I want, but there's still compassion for his body and what it can do now and
Mhm.
how that has nothing to do with his worth.
Mm.
Like, and it's very important because he's very much talking to specifically Black gay men, and that's this is the reason why I wanted to work with him was because he's a Black gay man, and so his his project was directed towards fellow Black gay men, and so the
Mhm.
thing I took with that, along with of course like changing certain habits and things like that, it wasn't image based. It was very much about being okay with the body that you have, and of course like it's okay to have goals and wanting like certain wanting to lose weight or wanting to become muscular or something like that, but it wasn't tied to worth. It wasn't tied to, oh, well, if you get the body, then you'll get this or whatever. It was
Mhm.
very much about what is healthy for you. and of course, like, you know, and what is healthy for people is completely different. But it was about health in a way that wasn't, like I said, wasn't tied to worth.
Mm,
And I think self-compassion is very important.
mhm,
We focus a lot on what our body isn't, as opposed to like what our body can do. Like your body, you woke up. You know what I mean?
mhm,
Like you got to, you know, you got to wake up. You got to walk. You think about certain things that it's helpful like to think about the things that your body can do as opposed to like what
mhm.
it can't or what it isn't or what it could
Yeah.
be. I think that's very important. I think it's important to follow people of different body types.
Mhm,
Um, if your timeline is literally people like with impossibly like chiseled bodies, of course you're going to feel a certain way about your own
mhm,
body. But it helps like if you follow people of different body types who are actually about body positivity. That word is thrown around a lot, but like who
mhm,
actually really practice what they preach and really not only highlight themselves, because I think it's also important for queer people to of course like show off and be sexual and to show off, you know, how attractive they are in their own way. um, but it's also important that we also support each other and highlight each other. So, and that's something that I definitely do, where you know I follow people who are very much about body positivity, like amongst
mhm.
themselves, and also also within the community, highlighting other accounts and other people who share the same value.
Yeah, yeah, wow, I love all of that. I just love, you know, distinguishing between what your body can do and its value, that are, you know, we're worthy regardless of how our body looks. And then, you know, recognizing that there's so many different bodies out there. We're all
Right.
unique, and diversifying what we look at, particularly on social media, seems so
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, and it's very important because media has such a profound effect on, especially in our community, our self-image.
Mm,
And so I think that's why I focus a lot on media
mhm,
because because we live in such a cis hetero dominant society where we're told like these negative things about ourselves. We definitely turn to media for representation. We turn to it for approval. We turn to it for validation. And
mhm.
so and so we turn to each other for all of that. And so if you only see a certain body type, even within your own community, like that's going to have an effect on your self-esteem. And
Mhm,
so it's important that we support each other in all of our body types.
mhm.
And yeah,
Yeah, that's amazing. That, I mean, such great messages to provide to people who are watching and perhaps struggling with how they feel about their bodies, as it's a
mhm,
journey that we're all on in some ways.
yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
be honest about we have to be honest about bodies. Like
Mhm,
our weights fluctuate. That
mhm,
happens. Yeah. That's something that I don't think like people in the community are very honest and realistic about. You
mhm.
know, you're going to lose weight, you're going to gain weight. It
Yeah.
happens. It will happen as long as you live. And to
Mhm,
be honest about that, and to be honest about why do you go to the gym? Be honest
mhm,
about what your goals are. It's okay
mhm.
to have those goals, but why do you want them? You know, why do you want to achieve those
Yeah.
goals?
Yeah, such a great point. I love that, and just I'm just so happy you shared those. Thank you so much, Dorian. I've really enjoyed all of these insights you shared in this conversation, and I'm so appreciative of your time that you spent sharing all of this with us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. Like I said, this is a topic that I love to talk about. I could like literally talk about this for another hour,
Mhm.
but I really do appreciate sharing this space with you. Thank you.
Great, thank you.